All right, here's a 4-question warm-up. Grade 8s. Today's date is May 20th, 2021. First question says, uh, Austin's mark was 90%, and he had a score out of 22. What was his score out of 22 if his percent was 90%? So this question does not fall into the percentage category necessarily, but it does deal with the percent. And the easiest way we said to solve these types of questions is with a skill we called proportional reasoning. We had a test on it not too long ago on utilizing proportional reasoning. So if I said x over 22, that would represent the score, Austin's score out of 22, that was equal to 90%. Now 90% could be represented with a decimal, 90% could be represented with a fraction, and 90% could be represented with a decimal, fraction, and percent. I'm going to start representing 90%. First, I'm going to do algebra. I'm going to represent it as 0.9. Okay? So if you solved it with algebra and you set up your question like this, you're not going to be using proportional reasoning, you're going to be using algebra. How would you isolate the variable x in this particular equation? What would you do? Multiply both sides by 22 is correct. So if I multiply this side by 22 and multiply this side by 22, our algebra sense kicks in. That should still be equal. And you isolate the variable of x, and whatever 0.9 is, I'll bring this over here, point multiplied by 22, your answer is 19.8. So therefore, Austin would have had, I'll use red here, 19.8 out of 22 to give him 90%. Okay? Did anyone use algebra in that question? A couple people. Good. The other way you could have done it is still using proportional reasoning. Okay, so you still using this x over 22. But instead of using 90% as a decimal, if I set up 90% as a fraction, we could still use algebra if you want. You can still multiply both sides by 22, or you could solve it using proportional reasoning. Now, there's 2 ways to do it, 3 ways to do it. You could divide both sides by 2.2, right, which doesn't make sense because you don't know what number divided by 2.2. If you reversed it, you multiply this side by 2.2, and you would have your answer for x, correct, if you use that idea. But the one we like the most with proportional reasoning is the algebraic method. Multiply across here to get 10x. Morning, Mademoiselle. Multiply the other way to get 198. So when I set it up with 10x equals 198, to isolate the variable, I divide both sides by 10. And x would still be 19.8 no matter how you did it. Second question, it gives us a table of fractions, decimals, over percents. The first fraction is 19 over 46. What's the easiest way to change 19 over 46 to a decimal? What is it? You take the numerator and you divide it by the denominator. So 19 divided by 46 is the simplest way to change any fraction to a decimal. Now the thing about this one is, and the reason why I use this symbol right here, this symbol means what? Approximately equal to. So if we're dealing with percentages, how many decimal places do you think we're going to keep? What do you think? 3 would be good. So I'm going to put approximately equal to 0.413. And if I think about percents, since percents are hundredths, what is the approximate percent for this? 41.3, right? We're going to use 41.3%, okay? And there's various answers. Because I did use the approximate symbol, you could have many different answers. It depended on how many decimal places you kept. Some people might have just kept 1, and they might have 40%. But if you kept 3, like you probably should have, you get a much more accurate percentage of 41.3. Our next question gives us the decimal of 0.0045 and asks us to write it as a fraction and a percent. Marshall, when you were given a decimal, which one's the easiest one to convert first, the fraction or the percent? I disagree with you. Why is the fraction the easiest? Well, you just need to read the decimal using place value, and if you read it with place value, then you have your fraction. So, Marshall, what number is that? Yeah, no, as a fraction. 45 10,000ths. And when you say it that way, it becomes 45 10,000ths. Now, some people would be smart and sophisticated and do what with that fraction? Reduce it to lowest terms, but you don't have to. We'll just keep it as 45 thousandths. And then how did you change that to a percentage? How did you go from that fraction to a percent? Same person. Yeah. Okay. Because you knew that first two decimal places were percentages and the rest of them are all fractional. That's one way to think of it. I like to think of it as an equivalent fraction out of 100, right? Because that's what percentages are. And in order to get rid of two zeros, you divide by 100. When you divide by 100 here, you have to divide by 100 at the top, which moves the decimal two places over, which is 0.5 out of 100, which is 0.45%. Okay. Our next question, 114%. Lemon, what's that as a fraction? Okay. But if we start off with just the easiest one, we would say 114 hundredths because it's percent, which is 1 and 14 hundredths, which if you did lowest terms is 1 and 7/50ths. And of those three fractions, which one's the easiest to write it as a percent? The first, the second, or the third fraction? The second one is definitely easiest because it's 1 and 14 hundredths, which is 1 and 14 hundredths. Question number 3 says a $28 hat was decreased with a D by 0.5%. What's the new price? So if you think about this as being the $28 hat and it was decreased by 0.5%, what percent, Sephora, of the hat are you going to pay for? If you decrease something by 0.5%, what percent will you pay for? Say again. No, you won't pay for 50% because it's not a half discounted, it's a 0.5% discount. Malcolm, if you discount something by 0.5%, what percent of the hat will you pay for? Taisha. 99.5. See the difference? See the difference? So if you lose 0.5% from the price of something, you're going to pay for 99.5% of something, which as a decimal is 99.5. So we're going to say 99.5% of the $28 hat. Grab my calculator and go 99.5% of 28 is 2786. Now, instead of using a calculator, what could I have done instead? I could have used mental math, right? So what is the first thing I should calculate if I do mental math for this question? What is 1%? What is 1% of $28? Mentally, 28 cents. You move it two places, right? So 1% is 28 cents if I move the decimal two places. So therefore, if 1% is 28 cents, what's half a percent? Half of that, which would be 14 cents. And if I take $28, 100%, take away 14 cents, I would get $27.86. And finally, your last question. A $245,000 house increased in value in 2020 by 40%, then it fell in value by 40% in 2021. What is the current value? So intuition would say that if it fell 40% and grew 40%, it didn't change at all. But the truth is it did. Because when it increases by value in 2020 by 40%, falling by 40% is going to be falling 40% of a bigger number. So the first thing I'm going to do, if it increases by 40%, using a calculator, this would be the easiest way to do it, because multiplying it by 1 takes into account all 245,000, and multiplying it by the additional 0.4 is an actual 40% more than 100%. So if I work that out with a calculator, 140% of 245,000 means the new value of the house is $343,000. After 2020, the house is now worth 343, but it's going to fall 40%. So if this is the $343,000 that the house is worth, and it falls by 40%, falls by 40%. What percent of the house, percentage-wise, is it left at? It's left for 60% of the 40. Were you going to say that? 60% of the 343,000. So we're going to write that as the current value is 60% of the 343,000. Now I'll eat crow if this actually works out to be the same answer, but it's not. So 60% of 343,000 means the final price is 205,800. So it actually is worth less in 2021 than it was in 2020. Continue recording. And I guess what I should probably say is there are other ways to do it. So one student said, could we just have made a bed mass question? The answer is yes. If you think about the first part was 140% of 245,000. This amount was then decreased by 40%, which means I'm paying for 60% of this amount. That statement would have worked as well. Or, alternatively, because your percentages are so easy, you could have used mental math. 10% was 24,500, right? 10%. And if I multiply that by 4, that would be 40%. I could subtract that for 245,000. This is the long way of doing it. Got a new number and then repeated the process again, but subtracted it. So there are multiple ways. The easiest way, of course, was to think of it in terms of multiplication.